noite. Ele nasceu na Palestina e depois da ocupação do território por Israel, viveu um exílio de 30 anos até voltar à terra natal. A experiência de reencontrar pessoas e o lugar onde nasceu virou um livro, até agora sua única obra em prosa, já que nesses anos todos ele se fez reconhecer como um dos principais poetas árabes contemporâneos. Nosso convidado desta noite é o escritor palestino Mourid Barghouti, autor de Ramallah, o livro que deu mais projeção internacional a seu trabalho, por colocar em foco as consequências da ocupação israelense da Palestina. O escritor palestino Mourid Barghouti veio ao Brasil como um dos principais convidados da Festa Literária Internacional de Paraty, a Flip 2006. Foi ali que ele fez o lançamento do seu livro no Brasil, em meio a debates sobre os conflitos contemporâneos que deram o tom político do encontro literário de Paraty.
Mourid Barghouti nasceu em 1944, num vilarejo próximo à cidade de Ramallah. Formado em literatura inglesa, atuou como representante da Organização pela Libertação da Palestina no exterior. No livro, Barghouti relata as consequências da ocupação israelense na Palestina, sob o ponto de vista de quem viveu na pele a experiência de ter que abandonar a região. São as recordações desde o momento em que cruzou a ponte para a Jordânia, no primeiro dia de exílio, até a volta 30 anos depois. Logo nas primeiras linhas, ele demonstra toda a ansiedade que aguardava ao escrever. Caminho na direção da ponte num andar normal. Num andar que parece normal. Atrás de mim, o mundo. E diante de mim, meu mundo. O livro de Barghouti só foi possível com o acordo de paz iniciado entre a OLP de Yasser Arafat e o Estado de Israel em 1993. Graças ao encontro entre os líderes nos Estados Unidos, o poeta pôde retornar à terra natal, o que só aconteceu 3 anos depois. Mas a paz ainda estava longe, como o próprio Barghouti deixa claro em seu texto. Ramallah, lançado em 1997, foi recebido com grande interesse pelo mundo árabe por mergulhar fundo num tema delicado para toda a região. Aos brasileiros em língua portuguesa, chegou às livrarias em 2006. Foi lançado durante a Flip, a Feira Literária de Paraty. Barghouti afirmou que, assim, se torna menos estrangeiro. O escritor palestino defende que o livro, após escrito, não precisa mais de seu autor, confiante de que encontrará amigos que irão recebê-lo em casa, em sua reflexão. Barghouti diz que os escritores apenas abrem uma janela e sempre haverá gente que fica do mesmo lado, olhando tudo do mesmo ponto de vista, enquanto outros seguem apostos em outras janelas, dispostos a ver o que ainda não foi visto.
Para entrevistar o escritor e poeta palestino Mourid Barghouti, nós convidamos Mamed Mustafa Jarouche, professor de literatura árabe da USP e membro do ICA, Instituto de Cultura Árabe. Lázaro de Oliveira, chefe de pauta do programa Metrópolis da TV Cultura. Safa Jubran, professora de língua árabe da Universidade de São Paulo e tradutora do livro Ramallah. Beatriz Kuchnir, diretora do Arquivo Geral da cidade do Rio de Janeiro e professora convidada do Departamento de História da Unicamp. Norma Cury, colunista do Jornal do Brasil e correspondente da revista portuguesa Visão. O Biratã Brasil, subeditor do Caderno 2 do jornal O Estado de São Paulo. E Fábio Santos, diretor editorial do jornal Destaque. O Roda Viva é transmitido em rede nacional para todos os estados brasileiros e também para Brasília. O programa desta noite, como está sendo gravado, não permite a participação direta do telespectador. Mas você que está em casa pode entrar em contato com o programa, mandar sua crítica, sua sugestão, as suas propostas pela página do programa na internet. O endereço é www.tvcultura.com.br/Roda Viva. Ali você escreve o seu e-mail. Boa noite, Mourid. Eu queria começar pelo seguinte. A gente conhece muito pouco no Brasil da poesia árabe, não só contemporânea. Eu diria que talvez depois do Omar Khayyam a gente não conhece nada. E o que eu queria saber é se o senhor acha que essa entrada pelo campo da prosa, quer dizer, por uma questão que é muito, digamos, interessante para o Brasil, na medida da nossa enorme comunidade árabe, que é a questão do conflito entre palestinos e israelenses, a situação política daquela região, se isso pode permitir, na sua visão, que mais cedo ou mais tarde a gente tenha uma aproximação com a poesia árabe aqui no Brasil.
Translation of poetry is difficult.
Muito.
Publication of poetry is more difficult. Publishers always complain that poetry books do not sell, and they always look for prose works to be translated. I have published 14 books of poetry. But then my first book in prose was translated into 11 languages. And the poetry is a different story. I feel myself mainly as a poet, but I lived this experience of return after 30 years in exile, and it was larger than the form of the poem. And I just let myself go, and the result was this prose book. Poetry or prose, I think literature is a bridge between cultures. Cultures in the main definition of the word. But in the same time, I feel that it's time for translators and publishers to bring to the readers the experience of poetry all over the world, from one nation to another, from one language to another. We also are eager to have a sense of, let us say, Brazilian poetry. But also our publishers would say, oh, translated poetry is a difficulty. So it's not a one-way track. We are all losers. I mean, if we keep this kind of cautiousness in approaching poetry, we would really lose too much. Because I think poetry and music are the universal language that nobody can live without. And if you go to the peasants, to the simple people in the villages, they express themselves in metaphors. So, I mean, poetry is not the form of the poem. Poetry is scattered all over the place we live in, the scenes that we see, the smells that we feel, the senses, in your house, in your neighborhood, in the nature, in the working place, in the streets, in the corners. Poetry lies under every stone. And I think by losing this chance to be familiar with the poetry of different nations, we are losing much. We are losing really much. I'm lucky to have this prose book translated into Portuguese, and it gives a sign of my style in writing, because poetry or prose...
Ele é pouco poesia também, né?
Yes, I write with the same sense of understatement, whispering, no oversimplification and no hyperbole, no bombastic tone, no heroic language. This applies to my poetry and to my prose. So I think Brazilian readers now have the chance to have a look to my way of writing, regardless of it is prose or poetry. So the style is almost is coming from the same spirit, my spirit, that desists and resists all kinds of bombastic tone, hyperbole, exaggeration, and oversimplification and generalization, and trying to be precise, trying to be as if you write with a camera, not with a pen. So I use images a lot. I make your eyes work, or I try to do so. Mm-hmm. So I think a glimpse of my poetry is there in this book, and it still be waited whether the way out for some poems to be translated into Portuguese will be easier because of the experience of having this book.
Posso perguntar?
Sim.
Ao contrário do Ferreira Goulart, que participou do senhor, com o senhor em uma mesa lá em Paraty, o Ferreira Goulart disse que sem fantasia não há poesia. E o senhor disse que poesia não é um entretenimento para ser praticado em momentos pacíficos. O senhor vê a poesia como uma arma? Foi o exílio que transformou a sua poesia? Ou isso é uma concepção sua?
No, poetry is not a poem, unless we say that the gun poetry is not a weapon, unless we say that a gun is a book of poetry. So a weapon is a weapon, and a poem is a poem. Mixing both of them, we will lose the two functions. So, but in a sense, to be precise, when I say it is not a weapon, I don't say it is not important. It is very important. But because poetry works very slowly on the front of culture, on the front of awareness, in the front of consciousness, in the front of memory. And it works slowly in history. Generation after generation, those voices and sounds and lines and rhymes and rhythms of poets pass into the readers from one generation to another, and they shape our souls, they shape our human condition, they shape our taste. In this way, you can say the word weapon. I mean, this kind of a strengthening element of our senses. And then the notion of poetry as a poem against your enemies or against occupation or against poverty, I don't believe in this. I believe that it works on other fronts of the human condition, but in the same time, in moments of emergency, in wars, in conflicts, in battle, you might have some quickly written poems or slogans in the demonstration or in the wars or in the radio station, just to make people braver, to make them stronger, to make them go on, to make them steadfast. This has a temporary effect, and this is not the role of poetry as I imagine it. It can be helpful for a period of time. When you are under pressure, when there is a dark moment in history, when there is, let us say, a prolonged emergency that people are living in. But the role of poetry actually is really on this front of the senses, the cultural life, the taste, and the human consciousness, the human awareness of beauty and ugliness, of just what is just and what is unjust, of justice and injustice, of fairness and oppression. On this front, all literature works slowly through the ages of history, but it leaves its marks, like drops of water on a rock. They leave a mark, and this mark is unwashable. It stays. It's very strong, stronger than stone. In this sense, I say it's a weapon, but not in this slogan, heroic radio, encouragement songs in times of military marches and wars and battles. You know, there is music and there is military music.
Yeah.
And maybe the difference between them is the difference between Toni Morrison and Tony Blair.
Sr. Barghouti. Sr. Barghouti, o senhor, apesar dessa força, dessa magnitude da poesia, o senhor não teme que nesses tempos sombrios em que vivemos, de uma certa forma, o ceticismo cada vez maior das pessoas vá, não digo extinguir, mas pelo menos prender, eliminar ou diminuir cada vez mais a força da poesia?
My attitude?
Sim.
Well, if something is powerful, a statement from my side will not make it less powerful. I mean, if poetry is powerful, then 100 statements cannot make it weak. But I'm trying just to fix where poetry is powerful. I don't say it is not powerful. I lived my life writing poetry, doing nothing except writing poetry. and I gave it my life. I feel it is significant. I feel it's extremely important. But I refuse to put it in another battle that is not its own. So poetry is important, poetry is significant, but I just want to place it properly. If you think that a poem is a bullet, you are not going to kill anyone. If you feel that your poem is an army, you will defeat no enemy. And then, for instance, our land is occupied. If poems can liberate one village, then we could have liberated 5 continents with our struggle for 100 years. Yeah. So many people killed and wounded and sacrificed their lives, and so many hundreds of poems were written. So if poetry liberates an occupied territory, then we could have liberated not only Palestine, but all the neighboring countries with our poetry. But, I mean, life is very cruel. When you speak, let us say, of people in crisis, like under occupation, this is something military, economic, social, and it's physical. And it has to be faced physically with equivalent power. But if you face it with songs and poems, you will reach nowhere. That's why poetry is important, but organization of people, providing them with weapons, with objectives, with means to be steadfast, with means to continue the struggle. This is the way to resist. No resistance dependent on art only. There is a resistance, and art is just working with it, around it, maybe in front of it. Like the French Revolution, I mean, literature and thought came first. But the French Revolution was not the result of literature. It was the result of the interaction of the structure of social, economic, and all aspects of physical life.
O senhor nunca foi cobrado pelos seus compatriotas por essa posição? Quer dizer, muitos dos palestinos que enfrentaram a ocupação fizeram isso fisicamente. Eduardo Said, que faz o prefácio do seu livro aqui na edição brasileira, foi muito criticado por ter, durante a Intifada, ido atirar pedras em tanques israelenses. O senhor nunca foi criticado pelos palestinos por nunca ter ido atirar pedras em tanques israelenses?
First of all, Edward Said was right by throwing stones. I liked him very much, and I congratulated him when I saw him after that. And I liked his photograph of his stone. It was symbolic. An intellectual who cannot oppose oppression, who cannot oppose injustice, does not deserve the title of intellectual. And you know, Said's life was summarized by the representation of intellectual and his research on this. And he was one who was critical of his own people, critical of the others. I am part of the collective Palestinian struggle against occupation. Maybe I'm not a soldier, but I am part in my critical view of our own performance, of the Palestinian leadership, criticism of the Israeli cruelty, the Israeli crimes, the Israeli massacres, the Israeli continued genocide that is being practiced against really a defenseless people. You know, whenever you read the two sides or the two camps referring to the Palestinians and the Israelis, this is a fallacy. You know, there is one powerful camp with 200 nuclear warheads with the fourth army on earth, who is sending F-16s and Apaches and throwing bombs on refugee camps. We don't have anti-aircraft rockets. So, okay, like what happened in Lebanon. Planes, Israeli planes were going to the skies and throwing huge bombs. This is not a war. I mean, for instance, Hezbollah does not have this anti-aircraft system. They don't have it. So if you send F-16 and F-17 and then throw a bomb and you use it, I destroyed Lebanon. Okay, you destroyed, but this is not war. War is to face your enemy, to face his tactics, to overcome his strategy, to achieve your objectives by beating an enemy. Now, but not by killing people, just like this. So I'm part of the resistance of my people, and people understand that by not being with the wrong, always, in Palestinian politics, or in Arab politics, or in international politics, is in itself a credit for a writer. And you know, our people really respect writers. They give us the highest degree of respect. They do not want us to be, let us say, firemen, or beg to bring them bread, or even to be, officers in the army. No. They respect the painter, the musician, the dancer, the poet. I mean, it would be naive to ask those artists to be something else, to put them in uniform. So our people is really mature, that they are not pressing us, not even pressing us to write slogans. Because, you know, in the 60s, the Palestinian poetry started by writing this kind of direct songs. Okay, people liked them. It was encouraging. They used to be broadcast in the radio with a chorale, you know, with drums and let's say sort of military music. It found happy ears with our listeners. But after a while, people demanded real poetry and real novels and real short stories and real films and real theater and real paintings. And now, if you go to the Palestinian, let us say a Palestinian audience, and you start shouting a poem like a slogan, they will not give you any credit for that. They will just feel that you are a beginner or something. So we are happy to have our own audience with their maturity.
Com o programa que hoje tem na plateia Marlene Paula Marcondes e Ferreira de Toledo, professora, doutora da USP, crítica literária e ensaísta. José Damião Bueno Licarião, engenheiro químico. Nathalie Araújo Lima, assessora de imprensa. Com Roda Viva, que esta noite entrevista o escritor palestino Mourid Barghouti, um dos principais nomes da poesia árabe contemporânea. Com 13 livros já publicados, lançou no Brasil seu único livro de prosa, Eu Vi Ramallah, um relato de sua experiência de retorno à cidade palestina, onde nasceu, depois de viver 30 anos no exílio.
Ramallah está localizada na montanhosa região central da Palestina, a apenas 16 quilômetros de Jerusalém. A cidade cresceu nos séculos 17 e 18 como uma vila agrícola. Era originalmente cristã, mas com a guerra de 1948, refugiados de outras partes da Palestina assentaram-se em Ramallah. Hoje, muçulmanos e cristãos vivem ali em harmonia. Antes um subúrbio de Jerusalém, a cidade se tornou, nos últimos anos, o centro urbano da Palestina. 40 mil pessoas vivem só em Ramallah. Com as cidades e as pequenas vilas ao redor, a população do distrito chega a 220 mil habitantes. Após a Guerra dos 6 Dias e a conquista da Cisjordânia e de Gaza, em 1967, por Israel, os palestinos reiniciaram a batalha por um território independente. Ramallah é geralmente considerada a mais influente, cultural e liberal das cidades palestinas. É a principal opção de moradia para ativistas, artistas, músicos e poetas.
Mourid, no seu livro, único publicado no Brasil, há um início bastante poético, até da descrição da sua travessia de uma ponte que o levaria de volta à cidade onde você viveu boa parte da vida e próximo da onde você nasceu, Ramallah, com uma descrição que não tem nada de político. Lá pela página 28, você encontra um soldado israelense. E a partir de então, em vários momentos da sua descrição, a interferência da ocupação, quer dizer, a presença dos israelenses na Palestina torna-se uma presença constante e não há como, da sua parte, digamos, deixar de lado o sentimento de opressão. Agora, a gente que assiste isso à distância aqui no Brasil, vê com muita frequência cenas na televisão que são, sim, de um lado, de ataques absolutamente injustos, desumanos e brutais contra a população indefesa da Palestina, dos territórios ocupados, ou melhor, dos campos de refugiados, seja qual for o termo que se utilize, mas vê também ataques terroristas ocorridos dentro de Israel por militantes de organizações palestinas. Isso não corre o risco de equilibrar as coisas no raciocínio da sociedade global?
No.
Por quê?
I'm afraid no. First of all, occupation is bad. Resistance to occupation is a right. Now, the whole world is insisting on examining the way the Palestinians resist, whether they made a mistake on Saturday or whether they were good on Sunday, whether this type of resistance is acceptable, whether that type is not acceptable. But they don't start with what they should start with. Let us agree first, occupation must leave. Help us get rid of the Israeli military occupation. And then everything is subject to discussion. We might make mistakes in our resistance, but the original mistake is the occupation. The original mistake of the human community is giving a silent and deaf ear to the appeals and cries of the Palestinian people. There are so many Security Council resolutions in favor of the Palestinian people, but they are dead papers. Okay, revive these resolutions. There is a resolution to create a Palestinian independent state in 1947. Resolution 181. Nobody is really struggling or fighting or calling or helping in implementing such a resolution. There is a resolution 194, which guarantees the right to return of all the Palestinian refugees to go back to their homes and villages and towns and cities from where they were expelled in 1948, when the State of Israel was established for the first time. Those resolutions are dead. The peace process, which is sponsored by the United States of America, is a false one because it is built on injustice to the Palestinians. That's why you had so many stages in this peace process, so many envoys from the United States coming to the Middle East, so many accords and agreements signed, and pictures taken in the White House, and smiles and shake hands and embraces. But this is all fake. That's why this struggle is always talented to go to its beginning, because it is not addressed from the roots. The roots is that there is a land that has been occupied by force. The Israelis occupied the Palestinian territories in the West Bank and Gaza in 6 days. They can withdraw in 6 days if they desire for peace. But they are staying there for 3 or 4 decades now, and nobody can help us to have our sense of justice being the oppressed people, being the civilians, being the people whose land is taken. Now, When people see that the international community is not implementing the resolutions, when they see that the peace process is a big lie, and it resulted in the killing of thousands of Palestinians, when you see that there are 11,000 Palestinian men and women and children are in Israeli detention camps at this moment, 11,000. When you see that 86 Palestinian pregnant women gave birth to their babies under the feet of the Israeli teenagers in uniform, in the checkpoints, in 400 checkpoints in the West Bank alone. They couldn't reach the hospital. When you see, a little girl or a little boy attacked at night, the Israelis knocking their door, coming inside, spitting in the face of the mother and the father, humiliating the father in front of the eyes of the children, then you are not creating a peaceful character here. You are not creating a lovely child. You are creating a child who is angry, who is ready to do anything. So frustration of the peace process, frustration of the lies of the United States that they are trying to give us peace, to give us state, the lies of George Bush, Condoleezza Rice, who are coming and going to the Middle East just to support Israel. When Israel was cornered in Lebanon, the objectives were not going okay, they ran to the Security Council. And they would bring 15,000 or 30,000 forces from the UN to protect Israel. So the Palestinian people, seeing all these frustrations, all these injustices, can go into this mistake or another in their resistance. But I'll tell you something. The international community criticizes the suicide bombers. I'll just remind the audience of the following fact. The first suicide bomber appeared in Palestine after 40 years of occupation. I mean, since 1967, put aside the 1948, the loss of historical Palestine to the Israelis. But since 1967, the first suicide bomber appeared in 1996. Before that, what was the scene in Palestine? It was the civilian popular uprising, the First Intifada, which was the stone revolution. The tanks of the Israeli military might and the stones of the Palestinian children. For 7 years, until the agreement of Oslo Accords in September 1993. So the First Intifada started in 1987. After 7 years, there was the Oslo Agreement. Arafat came inside with his men, and he said, we made a peace with Israel. We made all the concessions. He changed the charter of the PLO. He recognized the state of Israel. And he was photographed with Clinton. People thought peace is coming. And then this peace process stopped. No Palestinian state, no Jerusalem. The settlements became more and more and more growing around our eyes and around our villages and around our olive gardens. Our mountains, top of the mountains were full of settlements. The wall was built. And this is the result of the peace process. So people gave the peace a chance. And the First Intifada was civilians only, not a single violent action. But after Oslo, since 1993, people had some hope, and then it was diminishing, fading away. fading away all the time, with the American intransigence in helping Israel diplomatically and militarily, and with not implementing all the Oslo Accords themselves. I am against Oslo Accords. I wrote against them, but they were not implemented. Mm-hmm. So when we criticize the mistakes of any resistance in our times, we should first criticize the original sin, the military occupation of other people's land by force and staying there for decades, for year after year.
O senhor disse que escreve como filma, e eu me lembrei de uma entrevista do cineasta israelense Amos Guitai na semana de 10 de agosto no Le Monde. O Amos Guitai, ele diz que viver no Oriente Médio hoje é viver num banho de sangue de ambos os lados, e que a esquerda israelense ela é a favor da devolução dos territórios por paz, mas que a grande contradição é que Israel desocupou o Líbano e a Cisjordânia, e aí você vê zonas de conflito, e Israel está no Golã e o Golã está tranquilo. Por que, no seu modo de entender, isso está acontecendo agora?
Well, I think you gave 2 or 3 questions together, but I will try to cope with them. First of all, we respect all the Israeli voices who support peace and who are against their military governments. There are some individuals that we respect and we cherish their voices, but they are not a movement. There is no Israeli left as a movement. There are respectable individuals that we can point at them, be friends to them, but there is no leftist movement in Israel. I'll tell you something. This movement, peace camp in Israel, existed, and we welcomed them. But when the discussion arrived to the point of the right to return of the Palestinian refugees, they all shifted to the right. They all shifted to support the government, including Benny Morris, the new historian, who changed his ideas, and in an interview requested forgiveness for his book in which he exposed the demolition of 400 Palestinian villages in 1948. And he said, I criticize the Israelis for demolishing these houses not because this is bad, because they did not finish the job. And they should go on the ethnic cleansing, to the extent that the journalist told him, Mr. Morris, are you still the same person that I'm talking to? Are you the same person who wrote that book? He said, yes, and I am now with the government, because the right to return of the Palestinian refugees is equivalent to the destruction of the Jewish state. This kind of left is, like a nice flower, but it lives one day. And we are disappointed with the Israeli left. We are disappointed with the Israeli peace camp. As a movement, as individuals, we know them, they are there, they are respectable, and we respect the refuseniks who refuse to go to serve in the territories, in the checkpoints, and who refuse to go to Lebanon in war in 1982, and who refuse to go to Gaza to bulldozer the houses and engineer. Those refuseniks, those individuals, we respect them. We give them their credit. But as a movement in Israel, the left has really receded. And you see, this Shimon Peres is now the servant of any right-wing prime minister. He is no labor, he is no left, he is no Nobel Peace Prize winner. He's just a servant of the right policies. And he's a symbol of this diminishing influence of the right as a movement. The silence of the Golan Heights, to me, is an amazing thing. I don't like it. It's not acceptable for the idea of resistance to be beautiful everywhere except in the Golan Heights. This is my point of view.
Com Roda Viva, que tem na plateia desta noite Oswaldo Modesto, Economia, e Heloísa Barbuy, pesquisadora do Museu Paulista da USP. Mourid Barghouti é um poeta com 13 livros publicados. Ele lançou na Festa Literária de Paraty, a Flip 2006, o único livro de prosa, Eu Vi Ramallah, um livro que fala da sua volta à terra natal, cuja ocupação por Israel levou o escritor a um exílio de 30 anos. Mamed.
Mourid, aqui no Brasil, né, nós ainda não temos uma tradição de estudos árabes, uma tradição orientalista firmada, né, que a gente está se formando aos poucos. A pergunta é a seguinte, são questões óbvias, mas eu acho que seria interessante falar a respeito aqui. Você já deve ter respondido muito a essa pergunta. A literatura árabe hoje, quer dizer, ela é uma literatura dividida em literaturas nacionais, ou seja, você tem uma literatura egípcia, uma literatura tunisiana, libanesa, síria, e existe, enfim, uma literatura palestina, né, que é uma literatura, em certa medida, dissociada do lugar. Né? Agora, a pergunta que eu te faço é assim, uma questão bem de ordem genérica. Né? Quais seriam hoje as linhas de força da literatura palestina? Eu parto do pressuposto de que você, por exemplo, ao contrário do que poderia se esperar, você é um autor que rejeita um pouco o engajamento. Né? Então, pelo menos na literatura, da maneira como a gente conhece, né? Vulgarizada. Mas, enfim, eu gostaria que você falasse um pouco a respeito disso.
The Palestinian literature is part of Arabic literature. For 1,500 years, 1,500 years, Arabic literature did not belong to states. It belonged to the language. We write in Arabic, we write in Arabic culture, we are Arab writers. But since the division of the Arab world into states, into 21 states, so we started affiliating literature to states. For me, I don't like this, and I don't think it will last. So, for instance, you cannot say that there is, let's say, an Egyptian novel, and a Syrian novel, and a Lebanese novel. There is an Arabic novel written in this language about people living in that area, about the destiny of those characters, about the forms of writing in that genre, which is the novel. The same applies to poetry, to music, so it's the culture of the whole nation. But in the same time, because of the Palestinian problem, because of the loss of the land of Palestine, because we are negated geographically and historically from our place, there was some sort of limelight on Palestinian literature as Palestinian literature, not because it is regional or because it is uprooted or taken away from the texture of Arabic literature, but because it is, let us say, the sick member of the family who has some temperature, and we are waiting the recovery. So, in this sense, I don't see so much difference. I mean, an Arabic poem is beautiful or bad because of its structure, because of its being deep or being shallow, not being Palestinian or Algerian, or, and you know it very well. So I don't give the Palestinian literature so much credit or to be worse or better. It's part of the culture of this area. If it is good because it is good literature. If it is bad, it's bad because it is a bad literature, not because it is Palestinian or affiliated to any other geography.
Mourid.
Yes, please.
Afinal de contas, o livro seu, Eu Vi Ramallah, é mais um livro sobre a ausência de Ramallah na vida do exilado Mourid, muito mais do que é um livro sobre o encontro com a Ramallah depois de 30 anos. Então eu queria falar um pouco sobre o exílio e suas consequências. E principalmente para quem chegou a morar em mais de 30 casas, ou menos, ou quase 30 casas durante esses 30 anos de exílio. O que é e o como é morar no tempo, não no lugar?
Yes. You know, when you are in exile, when you are forced to be displaced, and your will is broken, you don't feel this spongy nostalgia to the memories of your childhood no, you feel stressed, oppressed, and you feel angry. And you start looking of ways and methods of how to say no, how to resist, how to turn things into making the suffering shorter and less painful. That's why, first of all, living outside for so many years gave us a very strange sense of the birth of a whole generation that Palestine stopped to be a physical, concrete presence with details, with alleys, with streets, with smells, with shops, with developing children into adults, into fathers, into grandfathers. Families become larger, streets become bigger, and then the village develops into a town, and the town into a city. This has not been the case. So there are generations who are in love with the idea of Palestine, not with the details, the physical details of the country that are told to them, those details, by the older generation as a verbal experience conveyed from one generation to another. When I saw Ramallah after 30 years, I was really shocked to find that I didn't know, after 30 years, anything, even the members of my family. The children became fathers. And then I was asked, do you know this man? I was ashamed to say no, and I lied. I said, yes, I know him, because he's your cousin, but you know that. So living in time to me means that the place itself has changed its character. It became memory. It became idea. But the concrete physical presence of Palestine is kept alive in the mind of those who are still there, who never left the territories that they lived in. They are under occupation, they are in jail, they are in working sometimes and unemployed other times. But in all cases, they are in the place. But there is a generation that is in love with the idea of Palestine, not in Palestine itself, as details.
Lázaro.
Mourid, você, 30 anos exilado, só fez poesia. Quando você volta a visitar a cidade, você adota a prosa para falar desse sentimento da volta. O que a poesia árabe tem de limitação que a prosa permite que você exponha seus sentimentos?
No, I wrote this book in prose, and I wrote 2 books in poetry about the same experience. But it took me longer to write poems, because poems have to mature themselves, with the passage of time. And then the prose expression came immediately after I crossed the bridge again, outside Palestine. I went to the pen and I started writing the prose. Poetry does not come that easily. So the same experience of return is to be followed also in 2 books that were published in after my visit. One is called actually 3 books. One is called People in Their Nights, and the other one is The Flower of the Pomegranate, and the third one is Midnight, which is a whole a book-length poem that is my last book. But mainly in the 2 previous books, there was also the experience of coming back to my hometown, to my birthplace, to my village, and it is written in a different way. But poetry did not let me down. poetry wanted more time, and I give it more time.
Agora, o fato de o inglês ser a sua segunda língua e, em muitos casos, imagino eu, a primeira, quer dizer, na medida em que o relacionamento no exílio, em muitos períodos, não era feito na sua língua natal, atrapalha a produção de poesia e prosa em árabe, ou fica mais fácil na medida em que esse é uma espécie de gancho que te mantém preso à ideia da Palestina?
Writing poetry?
Sim.
No, I think poetry is not a geographical expression. Poetry is a universal human expression. And then I think my choice of writing poetry is a choice that addresses humanity.
Sim, mas acho que eu não me expressei bem. Quer dizer, você faz poesia em árabe, certo? Faz poesia em árabe. E isso é que eu pergunto, o fato de ser em árabe facilita as coisas, facilita que a poesia apareça para você cuja língua natal é essa, ou o fato de estar vivendo num país onde muitas vezes você tem que falar inglês atrapalha?
Yes, of course. My language is Arabic, my mother tongue is Arabic, and I'm writing poetry in this language. I can't write it otherwise. I know some English, but I cannot write poetry in English. I don't want to write poetry in English. I'm addressing my own people first, but through them, I'm addressing all the oppressed groups of human beings, wherever they were, wherever they are, wherever they will be. And then poetry in this way is my only way of expressing myself. And if I write a novel or a narration or another memoir in prose, it will be to address this human condition that was my own experience or my people's experience, but it really has a lot to do with maybe your or his or her experience. Many people who read this book told me, oh, we passed through such a moment or that moment. We came back to that place and we felt the same. So I found the common grounds with other readers very encouraging. That's why poetry to me is a way of communication.
Eu queria voltar naquela questão do Amos Guitai. O Amos Guitai fez um filme, pelo menos, que se chama Free Zone. E há outros autores, como Amos Oz e como David Yoshua, que é um pacifista. Eu queria saber a sua posição, se o senhor se sente traído por ele, e por quê?
As I told you, maybe this question has been answered a little bit. The Israeli individuals who are with our Palestinian right are now being smaller and smaller in numbers. And the quality of their support is really going weaker and weaker. I'll remind you one thing, and the audience. The white South Africans under the apartheid regime in South Africa, who were revolutionary, who formed the left wing of the white man's policy in South Africa, those whites of South African regime, they supported the ANC, the African National Congress, and they joined it. They became members of the ANC. Just imagine an Israeli being a member of the PLO to show his solidarity or his opposition to the military occupation and to the genocide and to the war crimes committed by Israel. This never happened. I do not call upon those friends to come to join the PLO, but I'm just showing that there is some sort of real solidarity when the issue is really your own, and when you are part of this struggle, part of the resistance against oppression, you really give more than the Israelis are giving us. They are really moving into little numbers more and more, and their voice is weaker more and more. This war in Lebanon was supported by 82% of the population. So the writers in South Africa who were with the black movement, they joined the ANC and they fought with it.
Mourid, você falou agora que assim, você pretende que na sua poesia você quer falar ao seu povo. né? A pergunta é assim, qual é o seu povo? Né? A sua voz, ela alcança da mesma maneira ou atinge da mesma maneira um palestino como atinge um egípcio? Você disse agora que é ruim que haja divisões nacionais em literatura, que na verdade a literatura é árabe. Agora, você se coloca como um escritor palestino e é visto mais do que um escritor árabe, é visto como um escritor palestino. Antes de tudo se diz o escritor palestino Mourid Barghouti e não o escritor árabe, o poeta árabe Mourid Barghouti. Então, quer dizer, qual é o alcance da tua voz? Pensando que a sua poesia certamente é sentida de uma maneira por um palestino, talvez, vivendo sob ocupação, né? E por um marroquino totalmente afastado, né? Quer dizer, não diretamente ligado a esse problema. Então, é nesse sentido que eu te pergunto, qual seria, quer dizer, quem seria o seu público, se há diferenciação, quer dizer, para quem você fala?
Well, first of all, in 30 years, I was reading my poetry to the Arab audience outside Palestine. I read it in Morocco, as you mentioned, and in all the Arab capitals, and I read it in European capitals. And the reception of the poems was the reception of the quality of the poem. If the poem is really convincing, if it is well structured, if it is moving, then I get a beautiful reception. If it is bad, for me or any other poet, then it's not received well. So actually it is new for me to read to the Palestinians because my return was really very recent. But my poetry reached from Bahrain on the Gulf to Morocco on the Atlantic Ocean as poetry, full stop. And then if you like it, if you don't like it, then because it is poetry or not poetry.
O programa desta noite é acompanhado na nossa plateia por Valentina da Silva Nunes, professora da Universidade de Sorocaba, e Ângela Ribeiro, pesquisadora do Museu Paulista da USP. Nosso convidado desta noite é o poeta Mourid Barghouti, palestino que deixou a terra natal em razão da ocupação israelense, viveu 30 anos no exílio, escreveu um livro de prosa quando conseguiu voltar à cidade onde ele nasceu e nesse livro e em sua obra faz reflexões sobre esse interminável conflito no Oriente Médio. Biratã.
O livro trata da sua volta a Ramallah depois de 30 anos, então o que poderia ser algo com uma sensação boa, algo que denotasse algo bom, um tom que sobressai na prosa não é de um vitorioso, não é de uma pessoa que está retomando o seu caminho de volta, mas, claro, com todas as imposições que lhe são obrigadas, lhe são impostas para esse retorno. Queria que você comentasse um pouco esse fato de não dar um ar de vitória, mesmo você podendo voltar à sua terra natal 30 anos depois.
Yes, this return was not a victorious one. It was really painful. And when you are a poet, when you have the moral responsibility of a whole people around you, your relatives, your population of Palestinians who are refugees scattered all over the world, and then you are given the chance to return for a technical reason that gave you this privilege, you feel pain inside you. You don't feel celebration. And this was my feeling. And I said that the return is the return of all the refugees. It's not the return of any individual. It's not even the return of Yasser Arafat. And I was really not happy with the celebrations when he entered Gaza. Okay, 10,000 Palestinians went back with him. And what about the rest? And this is the result. The people who came with Arafat are now either in jail or in graves. He himself died or was poisoned, and then all the Hamas leadership are in jail now. I mean, 25 members of the parliament and 8 of the cabinet ministers are kidnapped at midnight and sent to jails, and nobody said anything, you know. So the whole adventure of having a government that is governed by the occupation is a stupid thing, and it will not work. That's why there was no sense of celebration, no sense of victory for the return of anyone. And you see, in this book, and I saw Ramallah, the tone is not a tone of triumph. It's a tone of meditation and asking questions more
Mas
than
também
giving
não é de
answers.
derrotado. Mas também não é uma volta de derrotado.
No, but I said it is meditation, not defeat. But it's not a triumphant return. It's not a triumphant victory that you are allowed to visit your country after 30 years. So it's a moment, it's a positive development, but it's not a historical breakthrough.
Mourid, eu queria voltar um pouco também para o livro e falar sobre a imagem do palestino. A imagem do palestino que todo mundo conhece, né, é aquela ou é de vítima, né, quer dizer, com a faca no coração, como você disse uma vez, ou de terrorista com a faca na mão, né? Agora, já no livro a gente vê um outro palestino. A gente consegue até imaginar, é um homem comum, né? É um palestino que é um pai, uma mãe, é um irmão, com palestinos, com pessoas comuns, quer dizer, com suas tristezas, angústias, alegrias, bondades e até pequenas maldades, como você coloca. Eu gostaria que você comentasse um pouco isso, e isso realmente que me impressionou no livro, ver o dia a dia dessas pessoas, né? Que é diferente, não é um rosto estampado no jornal. E uma outra coisa também ligada a isso, quando se refere a todas as pessoas no livro que morreram, sendo elas mortas na luta, na resistência ou simplesmente na cama por morte natural, sempre você antecede o nome delas com a palavra mártir, né? Eu queria saber por quê mártir, esse palestino, mesmo até estando fora, morto, não na luta, por que é mártir? Sempre por ter lutado ou por ter sido morto, talvez fora, por ter sonhado em voltar à Palestina e não ter podido, não sei. Gostaria que você falasse um pouco sobre isso.
Yes. Your question is two parts. The first part is the stereotype image of the Palestinians. There is a sort of a character assassination of the Palestinian by the international media. We are subject of misinformation and disinformation. We are absent from the TV screens, except we have blood on our hands or in our back or in our heads, except when we are moving away from the screen to be put to grave, or moving somebody else with us, killing him away as terrorists or as victims. But this Palestinian lover, Palestinian musician, Palestinian writer, Palestinian husband, grandfather with white hair, and frail grandmother, and talented Palestinian, stupid Palestinian, Palestinian faithful to his wife, sometimes cheating on his wife. You don't see a love story on Palestinians. You don't see normal Palestinian, a Palestinian researcher, Palestinian dancer. You don't see them on the TV. They do not exist. What exists is the Palestinian who is a case, who is a problem. The Palestinian people are not a problem. They are a nation. And this image is not shown to the world. What is shown to the world is the Palestinian as a clinical problem, as a case, not as a human being. No. This is the first part of your question. And you wanted to know
O porquê mártir?
about the martyr. You know, in our Arabic culture, there are words that are really misunderstood universally. When you say, for instance, martyr, or when you say jihad, you see, people think that those are words that have the meanings that is in the head of Rumsfeld, as if he is the dictionary of the Arabic culture, or the dictionary of the meaning of any culture in the world. So this kind of neocon language that's afraid of the connotations of certain words. If you go to the word, let us say, martyr, in our culture, if you are a traveler and you faced an accident and you couldn't go back to your family, you are a martyr. This is in the popular culture. If you went to study in Harvard and then a car ran over you and you couldn't go back to your waiting mother and father, you would say he's a martyr of education. This is in the culture. If Qais loved Layla, who are two famous figures in Arabic culture, and they could not crown their love in a marriage, and then the man went crazy in the deserts and singing poetry and never married his beloved, he is called Shaheed al-Hub, the martyr of love. So this is a word that is different from this kind of neocon definitions and the institutes in Washington that are analyzing the word being martyr, then connecting it with the 8 o'clock news bulletin. This is a very deep-rooted terminology in a culture that goes back thousands of years. This language is not designed just to suit the CNN that is created 50 minutes ago in history. The same word with jihad. Jihad is, for instance, if you are struggling to achieve something, and then this demands you to be humiliated, to lose face, and you resist your temptation that I will not lose my dignity to get that money. I will not lose my dignity to get this woman. I will not lose my dignity to be a minister. I will keep my dignity. You are making a jihad against your temptations. This kind of resisting the vicious voices that drive you to get, earthly gains, sacrificing permanent values. So jihad is to struggle in war, to struggle against your temptations. This is also jihad. And this word, many children, people and journalists and poets and bankers, their names is jihad. As your name is Muhammad, my name is Mourid. Jihad is a name. As you name Christian or you name David, so it's a name. And when they go to the United States, in the board, you are jihad, and then they are, it's just a name. So, this culture has so many elements, so many words, so many connotations of words. If you just want to put them in the proxed bed of the CNN and the Fox News, you will destroy the whole culture of the region. Those are people who are thinking that politics is the 8 o'clock news. Politics is not what happens in the past 24 hours. Politics is a whole structure of human justice or injustice. Who decides the behavior of whom, justly or unjustly? And then you can't follow really some terminology and you examine and scrutinize this word or that word. This is a lost effort, in my opinion.
O senhor, a experiência do exílio, voltando à questão do seu livro, é uma experiência muito silenciosa. E eu queria aproximá-la de uma frase da Hannah Arendt, que ela vai dizer que compreender não é perdoar, que compreender traz consigo uma noção de reconciliação com aquelas experiências. O seu livro carrega essa ideia de reconciliação? A voltar a Ramallah era uma tentativa de se reconciliar com aquele passado?
I didn't get the question whether you mean that I called for reconciliation with myself or with my past. No, reconciliation and...
Porque é uma reconciliação sem perdão, né? A reconciliação para Hannah Arendt é você se reconcilia sem perdoar, né? Você tenta vivenciar aquela experiência sem perdoar.
Yes, we live in a historical moment that we cannot get everything we want. So you reconcile with the limitations of history, but you feel that your right is a whole. And you can draw it, you can touch it, you can remember it, you can fix it, you can tell it to the children. You know what is the whole right of the Palestinians. But we know also that there are limitations in this modern political life of the ambitions of the Palestinians. We accepted to give concessions to the Israelis and to reconciliate with them in order to live in peace with them side by side in a different Palestinian state. With this notion of reconciliation, I felt that I can live with this fact. Unfortunately, it proved to be impossible. Even this solution of two states is becoming more and more impossible now. With the building of the wall, with the dissection of the West Bank, with the building of the settlements, with the domination of the Israelis on air and sea and land entries and ways out of the Palestinian territories, you cannot make any state. Now we are really meditating again the first idea of the PLO, which is a one democratic, secular state in historical Palestine, one man, one vote. Let it be governed by a Jew, by a Christian, by a Muslim, by an atheist. We don't care. We want equal rights to all citizens in historical Palestine. Everybody should stay where everybody is, but as equal citizens in one free, secular, democratic country. Of course, Israel says no to such a solution, and the Americans say no, and the lovely Tony Blair says no, and then we will continue in this problem for a long time. And this war against Lebanon was the sixth war. I'm telling you, it will not be the last. When Sadat signed the first peace treaty with Israel in 1979, he said, this October war, this Yom Kippur war, is the last of the wars between Israel and the Arabs. After that, we had 5 wars. And the 6th is going on now in Lebanon. And bring the calculator.
Última pergunta, daria um programa inteiro, mas o nosso tempo acabou e eu gostaria de uma resposta sintética. O final do seu livro tem um fantástico capítulo muito curto sobre a importância, eu estou simplificando a coisa, a importância do travesseiro, uma espécie de juízo final diário que a gente enfrenta. Eu queria saber como é que o senhor enfrenta o seu travesseiro, com a sensação de que fez a sua parte.
Well, when I go to my pillow, I see my mistakes more than I see my good things. I see my weak poems more than I see my successful poems. I'm always suspicious of any achievement. I'm suspicious of any form that I choose, of any book that I write. And in the same time, I'm suspicious even of my points of view in life, because no one can be sure whether one's analysis is 100% correct or 100% final or 100% suitable for the next 2 or 4 or 5 years to come in his own life. So the pillow is really a cruel judge that has no mercy with the head sleeping on it. In my case, really, I'm a very critical person socially, but I'm critical also to myself, to my inner self. For instance, I look at the poetry I published, those 14 books, I feel, 4 of them should not have been published at all. I mean, and every time I feel that the better is to be fought for yet. It's not achieved. And my pillow is really my first critic.
Muito obrigado pela sua entrevista. Eu espero que o telespectador em casa vá encontrar o seu travesseiro, sabendo um pouco mais sobre a Palestina, um pouco mais sobre poesia árabe e, enfim, um pouco mais sobre essa questão que é tão importante para nós e que muitas vezes realmente passa pela mídia como se fosse fácil de resolver ou, de outro lado, como se jamais tivesse solução. E a gente espera que não seja nenhuma coisa, não é fácil, mas espera, obviamente, que um dia isso se resolva. Obrigado a nossos entrevistadores, a você que está em casa, e voltaremos na segunda-feira com mais um Roda Viva. Uma ótima semana e até segunda.